Mr. Cannabis.
Cannabis plants have a complex life cycle that includes 8 stages: seed storage, germination, seedling or pre-vegetative, vegetative state, sexual maturity, early flowering, mid-flower, and then late flower. It's essential to understand each stage to provide proper care and attention to your plants. Seeds must be stored properly in cool, dry, and dark conditions for long-term viability. I keep mine in the fridge, in individually sealed bags inside another main sealable bag. And you should always allow your seeds to return to room temperature before sorting through the bags and potentially opening them to prevent the warmer air from condensing onto your cooler seeds, potentially leading to mold and rot. There are a few ways to germinate seeds, but they all do the same thing: provide moisture and warm temps to your seeds. Some people soak them in room temperature water until they crack. Others put them right into media, like cups of soil or soilless mix, or peat or rock wool starter plugs. This option not only has the benefit of having to not remove your seeds once they've popped, reducing any possible damage to the taproot, but it also aids in the position of the root. Now you may be asking yourself, if planting them straight in the media is less damaging and better for taproot development, why doesn't everyone do it that way? I don't know. I can't speak for everyone, but the reason I do it is because back in the day, I had issue with fungus gnat larvae eating my seeds. So to combat that, I moved to the tried and true paper towel method, and I never looked back. I also don't like watching the soil line, waiting for them to pop to see how many I'll have, as I'm often popping seeds from 15 plus years ago. I like knowing how many I'll have before they're even in a medium. To start germinating your seeds with this method, you need to prepare a germination container or plastic bag, labeling them if necessary. Place your seeds between several damp paper towels and place them in the plastic container or bag to minimize moisture loss. The container should remain dark, warm, and humid at all times. Spray the paper towels with room temperature water and cover with a lid or fold the bag. Place the container in a warm place, ideally between 70 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. If you need more warmth, you can always use a seedling mat. If you don't have one, you can always place them on top of one of your cooler lights or an HID with a spacer between them so they don't get too hot. If this is your first time popping seeds with this method, be sure to check them frequently at first so they don't get too warm. I would suggest even trying out this setup without seeds first, as the last thing you want to do is fry your potentially new crop before they even sprout. The paper towel should remain moist at all times. Do not let them dry out, as the seeds will not sprout if they're dry. Keep the paper towel moist, but not soaking wet. You remember what happens when water is warmed, right? Dissolved oxygen gases off, so you don't just have them sitting in water. Just enough so that there's available water that the seeds can soak it up. You can use a spray bottle to further wet the paper towels if they're needed in a day or two. The time frame for your seeds germinating is, like everything, dependent on variety, but usually it's 2 to 5 days. Once the seed is opened up and the taproot has emerged, it's ready to be planted. Do not wait for all your seeds to pop before planting them. The seed only has so much energy stored to use before photosynthesis begins. So if you let the taproot grow too long, you can use up all its energy and it may stall out and die. So plant them as they pop. Ready your next growing media, such as soil, cocoa, rock wool, or whatever you've chosen. Gently place the germinated seed in your media, using your washed fingers, a spoon, a wet piece of plastic, whatever. The taproot should be placed downwards if possible, if not just sideways. The root will bend around and down, using that bend to lift the plantlet above the soil line. Now, I see a lot of new growers online worrying about this topic. Down is best, but seriously, don't worry about it too much. I literally just chuck mine in the hole and cover it up. The stem can elongate slightly, but not much, so it's best to plant the seed not too far down, only about ½ an inch or centimeter down and covered up. If you want to forego the paper towel method, then soak your seeds for a day in room temperature water, then plant them straight in the medium to germinate. You're just trying to create the same environment, warm and moist. And as we talked about in section 8.8, there are plenty of plugs, trays, domes, and heating mats to help you maintain the proper environment for your seeds until they sprout. In soil, peat, or cocoa, this is easy and straightforward and can be placed into a seedling tray, a small pot, or 16-ounce cup with drainage holes. In a Jiffy or Rockwool plug, you can either just fluff up some of the media and put it over the hole, or you can add some perlite or vermiculite to cover it so that the seed doesn't dry out in the light. The newly planted seed should be placed in a warm and not too humid environment, usually between 72 and 77 Fahrenheit and 70 to 75% relative humidity. Some people might suggest that you not put the seed under a light until it sprouts from the media. However, once the seed has popped its taproot, their metabolic activity begins, including sensing and searching for any light source. So it's best to get them under light as soon as possible. They don't need much light, so depending on the source, you can either keep it mid-range for T5s or much further away for HIDs. And since the heat from the light will encourage evaporation, raising the VPD, you can choose to germinate the seeds under a humidity dome. Though myself, I've never really worried about that, as generally they're in a veg room with a bunch of other mums transpiring, meaning that it's basically perfect for germination in there. But if they're alone in a dry room under a light, you may want to consider it. If in a cup of media, that's fine for a week or two, but if in a Jiffy or Rockwool plug, they must be transferred into a pot of media, slab, or deep water culture container within a few days after breaking through the surface. The roots will let you know when they need transplant, so once they're at the bottom of the cube, get them into something so they can start building root mass. Being as that they have very little transpiration surface, they can't uptake much water, so only give them sparing amounts of water so that they don't dry out. Seedlings or pre-vegetative state typically lasts about 1 to 3 weeks after sprouting and requires adequate lighting for roughly 16 hours daily, but I've always vegged under 18 hours. Leaves initially have a singular blade called cotyledons, but their first true leaves will more resemble a normal leaf, but still with only a single blade. Short roots and minimal water requirements makes it crucial to provide a targeted amount of water. Cannabis seedlings thrive at lesser intensities of blue spectrum light, so don't blast your seedlings with too much light right away, or it'll stress them while they're delicate. Try to keep your room about 78 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit during the daytime hours, with ideal nighttime hours around 65 to 67 degrees, with a relative humidity of 70 to 80 degrees. These are just estimates for daytime photosynthetic activity and nighttime respiratory activity. Your VPD should be kept low to limit transpiration rates or, moreover, transpiration stress. The point is to not push your young plants too hard at the beginning. As they age, you'll gradually be lowering your relative humidity and increasing the VPD all the way through to harvest. Seedlings have a taproot which drives down into the media and attempts to find groundwater. So the first few waterings, you can focus on watering the center of your media without letting the exterior dry down too much to become hydrophobic. If you transplanted them into a highly porous media like perlite, rockwool, or hydroton, where you'll eventually be using multiple drippers, you can just place 1 or 2 near the plug so that there's only a small footprint of watering. Clones will have a more balanced root system of fibrous roots that will grow laterally, so you can extend the watering radius slightly in these early days. As we talked about in section 6.5, giving your plant all the water and nutrients that they need while growing can produce lazy roots. In propagation, you're growing roots, not so much plants, so you'll want to encourage root development by making them search out for water and nutrients. Especially with synthetic nutrients, as at this young age, it's easier to veer into toxic levels as there's minimal nutrient storage availability within the plant when they're so small. Just don't let them get too dark. I'd suggest about 1 EC, but the plant will let you know, so pay attention. Cannabis plants will exceed their beginning pots and will require additional nutrients and light during the vegetative stage. Roots and foliage expand quickly, enabling the plant to absorb more nutrients and CO2. So it's time to transplant them into 1 to 2 gallons for soil or soilless, and say a bigger cube or slab for rockwool. However, grows like deep water culture, NFT, and aeroponics, where the roots will just keep growing, you don't have to worry about that. Optimum temperatures for cannabis growth are approximately 72 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit and 63 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit at night. Ideal relative humidity at this stage is 65 to 70%, or a VPD of 0.6 to 0.8 kPa. A temperature difference, or diff, between the day and night is important to stimulate proper growth. However, you don't want to swing between 85 degrees Fahrenheit in the day and 60 degrees Fahrenheit at night. That's quite the difference. The temperature drop between day and night should ideally be around 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit to mimic the natural outdoor conditions and promote healthy growth. High temperatures can elevate susceptibility to many problems, but of course, we already know that. Take a moment and see how many you can remember. I'll wait. No, you pause the video and do that. They include root rot and dissolved oxygen gases out from the media, pest populations as higher temps increase their maturing times and speeds up their life cycles, nutrient burning as they take up too much nutrient solution while they're trying to cool themselves through transpiration, lower VPD levels as the higher temps hold on to more water vapor in the air, and stoma closing as excessive water loss causes guard cells to lose turgidity and close. At this stage, 2 to 4 weeks in, is where you start seeing what this phenotype is all about. As I've mentioned, roots are growing, leaves are expanding, showing possibility of sativa to indica ratio, how their node spacing is going to be like, how bushy or lanky they're going to be, how much water they consume, how light or dark they're getting from their nutrient regime, and if they're actually showing any signs of deficiencies. This is the stage where you need to figure out what you're going to do with them during the grow. If you're going to be running multiple phenos, short ones under the light and tall ones to the sides like a stadium. Are most plants a good color but a few are getting really dark or really light? If so, you're going to have to lower or raise the EC for just them, potentially feeding by hand. If so, move them to the front if possible for ease of watering. If you want to do scrog but they're not as bushy as you'd like, so now you have to pinch them and give them more time for vegging, etc. So this is when you know if you're on track or if you're going to have to make some changes. Plants of this age and size are really starting to grow and show their potential, so pay attention and don't just hope everything will work out. But also, just take a moment to enjoy that your new garden's on the way. As the roots fill in the new media, you should now be watering for the whole pot. Not soaking it all, we're still going for a moisture level around 3 for the bottom quarter of the pot, but making sure that you're watering to the edges of the top and getting enough penetration. We're still trying to encourage vigorous root development. For dripper systems, move drippers closer to the edges and possibly keep water duration short if you don't want too much penetration just yet. And add further drippers if you're getting too big of dry spots around the margins. For a flood and drain system, now is the time when you might want to start flooding instead of hand watering. You'll want to keep hand watering until you see significant roots forming at the bottom. Otherwise, that water may just sit in your media for too long and your roots can't get at it. You have to think about watering as ramping your plants up. Just because they're in a new pot doesn't mean you want to blast them with water. Just like it doesn't mean you want to blast them with nutrients. Just like you don't want to blast them with light. Ramp them up and then pay attention to how your ladies react. Any media that's highly porous and needs near constant flow, just watch out that the salts aren't building up within all the crevices. Cannabis plants become developmentally mature at about 8 to 10 nodes of growth, or 4 to 5 weeks old. Nodes will begin to stagger instead of growing opposite of each other, and plants may begin to pre-flower, developing reproductive organs that allow determination of their sex. For regular seeds, this allows for the selection of desirable female plants and the removal of any male plants before they can seed the crop. In this stage, your plant will seriously start taking off, so you need to monitor your watering schedule and possibly change it every few days, depending on your pot or cube size that they're in. And this is when you should be finalizing everything. If you add males, you've removed them and spaced the remaining females. Depending on your pot or cube size, this is when you should be thinking about maybe transplanting them into their final media that you'll be flowering them in. Or if vegetating longer, why not fit another pot size in between this and your final size? This is also when you should start thinning the insides of your plants, removing any lower branches that aren't receiving enough light and won't be able to be part of the main canopy. If you're scrogging, you should be well on the way to shaping the canopy the way you want it, etc. Any bumps or hiccups or issues within your environment should be ironed out now, as once they enter flowering, they won't be able to resist pests or pathogens as well. Depending on your scheduling, growing method, and room size, we're about ready to enter flowering, so everything should be set up for them and ready to go. Watering should be done with the entire surface for penetration, saturating to runoff at least every third watering by now. Lazy roots should still be avoided, forcing them to fill out the pot or cube without limiting their root health. So between your full saturation to runoff watering, you should be minimizing the watering still. Feed, feed, flush is the general rule, but that's just to give you an idea of what you're trying to accomplish. Your first feed is after the previous flush, so the media was recently heavy. So this first feed is just to re-moisten the media. Aim for a moisture level of about 3 to help encourage further root development. Your second feed, depending on how your plants are uptaking, can be level 3 or 4. Then your final flush can be a heavy watering of level 5 or more to flush out any salts and help balance out your pH. You're just trying to ride the moisture wave, drying them back a bit, keeping them decently moist, then hitting them harder, then drying them back a bit, keeping them decently moist, etc. You should aim for a good watering almost every day. Once you need to water to saturation or level 5 basically every day, increasing the pot size and starting the cycle again is recommended. If your ladies have already been in their final media for a bit, before the last pruning before flower, the media should be flush well with a lower EC, while she still has many leaves for enough transpiration to uptake quickly and use all that water. Drippers should run some short shots for lateral penetration, then greatly increase to move salts out, if you want to keep things automated. But you can always just hand water and get an extra volume in there for a good flush. Flood and drain can increase the flood duration, not just to saturate the media, but to let all the salts in the media become soluble again, then drain as quickly as possible to pull everything out well. But I would again suggest a hand watering once instead, just to get as good a flush as possible. But you do what's best for your situation. In this phase, indoor growers need to switch the light timer to a 12-12 cycle to maintain the plant's dark hours to promote proper blossoming. Photoperic plants begin to flower with more than 10 to 11 hours of uninterrupted darkness during a 24-hour period, which increases the gibberellin levels to trigger flowering. Any disruption to this cycle could cause the plant to become confused and postpone flowering onset. Gibberellins actually have many uses within the plant, including but not limited to root development, stem and cell elongation, bud and trichome development, and various responses to stress. Outside, unless you have an auto-shitting system to black out your plants, you should just let them do their thing. Just make sure that they're out of reach of any porch or street lights that can cause light pollution and confuse them. Anything brighter than a full moon may disrupt this cycle. There are 3 distinct phases in the flowering stage: early, middle, and late flowering. This stage begins at a turbocharge veg period, where nitrogen and plenty of water are necessary to sustain the vigorous growth. And for a lot of new growers, or just growers new to the variety, may be a bit of a surprise as to how big these ladies can get. It becomes a balancing act as the plants double or more in size and the undergrowth is trimmed away. If you weren't aggressive enough with your thinning and late veg, this will now become apparent as your tops shoot away from what you thought would be the middle of the plant, only to become basically the new bottom. And this happens rapidly. As you can see, there's only 2 days between these 2 picks. After about a week to 10 days, the vegetative growth will slow and the nodes will start producing stamen, or pistils if you want. This is honestly when you need to do your last thinning, as the plant is now shifting focus from vegetative to generative growth, meaning that it's no longer focusing on healing itself. Though it obviously still does, it will be given a lower priority than when it was in veg. I've seen many growers wait until halfway through flower and the buds are developing well before they do any real thinning, and then they end up removing like half the plant. Dozens, if not hundreds, of individual wounds all over the plant, while they're trying to focus on making flowers. So when they're trying to build biomass, cannabinoids, and terpenes, let them. You don't want to be like, oh hey, can you also maybe heal like 5% of your surface area that are now wounds? Thanks. Right? Got it? Good. So ideal climate conditions are temperatures of 72 to 84 degrees Fahrenheit and 55 to 65-70 relative humidity, or 0.7 to 0.9 kPa. Since there's little to no bud mass so far, humidity concerns aren't so much an issue yet, so running pretty normal levels is still okay. However, if you're freaking out because your ladies are just too big, but you don't want to cut off those nodes that will become beautiful colas, you should always just run a lower temp overall, which will limit the internodal stretching of early flower. As we learned in section 2.3 with drop, especially 2 to 3 hours before lights are on, which will limit the internodal stretching of early flower. Of course, maybe you could also LSD or tie down your branches if they'll allow it. But I know a lot of people don't like creating curvy, weird colas, so... Now, I would still suggest that you're watering to produce root development. Running them a little light can also limit their growth during their turbocharge growth phase. So basically the same watering regimen as in vegetative, just adjusted for the larger plant size. If you didn't give them a decent flushing before flower started, I would definitely do that now. Once the buds start packing on, you'll be raising EC levels, so you want the media to be as fresh as possible when you do so. Also, this should be the time when you switch to bloom nutrients if you're making that switch. As before now, all the growth was still mostly vegetative. This phase lasts for about 4 to 5 weeks, starting after the second week. Plants slowly stop expanding and switch to flower production. Reducing the humidity to 50 to 60% or a VPD of 1 to 1.2 kPa is necessary to limit the risk of fungal disease. Flowers expand and older leaves may start to yellow and fall off from the lower levels of nitrogen in your nutrients. It's recommended to remove them as soon as possible to prevent any fungal diseases from taking hold. Selectively removing fan leaves can allow for more light and airflow through the canopy and promote plant health. Watering as much as possible while still keeping root health is critical during this phase. This is where growing these massive root systems really pays off. To push them as much as possible, you need to pay attention to how quickly they're using their nutrient water. As biomass production increases, they should be taking up more water and nutrients. But if you notice that the media isn't getting as light as often, do not just keep feeding them at the same rate, as there might be an issue with the roots. Literally pull them out of the pot and take a look. Roots don't just die overnight after one big watering. It takes you not paying attention and watering too much a few times that does the damage. If something seems like it's going wrong, don't just hope that it isn't. Check and change your method if needed. This applies to nutrients too. The more biomass they're producing, the more nutrients they require. But if they're getting too dark, pull back a bit. It's better to run them at 85% of what they need than lock them up with toxicities and nutrient antagonism. At this phase, your plant should be exceptionally stinky and have a strong smell. Temperature, humidity, and growth should be closely monitored for optimal harvesting. The bulk of psychoactive cannabinoids are synthesized during this stage, and about 20 to 30% of dry flowered weight is added during the final ripening phase. Humidity should be reduced to 45 to 55%, or 1.2 to 1.4 kPa to prevent any signs of bud rot. Temperature should also be reduced to a maximum of 80 degrees Fahrenheit. After all, it generally starts getting cooler in the fall, and plants have evolved into certain environmental conditions. Nighttime temperatures are often reduced to manage the reproduction cycle of any pests or pathogens, plus increase the purple coloration in flowers. Growers should use gratuitous amounts of water to flush 10 to 14 days before trop, as more will not harm them once the media is fully saturated. Then just use regular amounts of pure water until the last week, and then dial the water back even more as the metabolic activity and transpiration rates slow.